Okay, so today we're going to dive into something that I think a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how to give feedback, how to receive feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and how to really create that culture of open communication in the workplace.
Yeah.
And to do that, we are looking at this concept of radical candor, right?
Right.
It's a book, it's a whole thing, and we've got some great material to unpack it.
Yeah. It's all about how to get that honest feedback flowing, but in a way that actually strengthens relationships and gets results.
Right, exactly. Because there is a balance.
Oh, for sure.
Right, we're not just talking about being brutally honest.
No, no, no.
It's not about being mean.
Not at all.
So how would you describe that core balance, that tension that the book kind of gets at?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's a balancing act. It's how do you care personally at the same time that you're willing to challenge directly?
Okay, I like that. Care personally and challenge directly.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciate about the material we're looking at is that it's not just, feel-good vibes and general concepts.
Right.
There are very practical steps laid out
Absolutely.
for how to actually put these principles into practice.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're going to really dig into care personally and challenge directly.
Okay.
What do those even mean in practice?
Yeah.
How do we use those ideas to, give feedback in a way that doesn't make people defensive, that actually helps them grow?
Right.
And how do we build that trust where people feel safe to be challenged?
Yeah, totally.
So let's jump in. Starting with the two core pillars, right?
Okay.
Care personally and challenge directly. So when we're talking about care personally, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
It seems like it's more than just being, polite at work.
It is, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not just surface level pleasantries.
Absolutely.
How would you describe that deeper level of caring personally?
I think you're right. It does go a lot deeper than just being, professionally courteous.
Right.
It's really about forging a genuine human connection with the people you work with.
Yeah.
You're recognizing them as whole individuals with lives and concerns that go beyond just, their 9 to 5.
Right.
It's about showing genuine interest in their well-being.
Yeah. And what struck me when I was looking at the materials for this is this idea that it's described as, deeply personal, right? So it's not just about, are you hitting your targets? Are you completing your tasks?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's about understanding those aspirations, those challenges that your team members might be facing outside of just their job.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, they're people with their own things going on.
Yeah.
And recognizing that is huge.
Okay, so that's care personally.
Yeah.
And then, you've got this other side, the challenge directly.
Right.
So this is where I think it gets a little trickier for people. Because, this is about providing that honest feedback, both the good and the bad.
Absolutely.
Right? It's about setting those high expectations and having those potentially uncomfortable, difficult conversations.
Right.
Nobody really enjoys giving critical feedback.
No, and nobody likes to receive it either.
Right. But the book argues that, when it's done well, when it's rooted in care, that direct challenge is actually, one of the most supportive things you can do.
Right.
Because you're basically saying, I believe in you, I think you can do better, and I'm willing to tell you the truth, even when it's hard.
Exactly, yeah.
So when we talk about this balance, right, care personally and challenge directly, what does it actually look like when you get that right?
Well, that's where the magic happens, right? That intersection. That's what the book calls radical candor.
Okay.
Or sometimes compassionate candor. And it's powerful because you're being direct and you're being clear, but it all comes from a place of genuine care and empathy. You want to see that person succeed, and you're willing to be honest with them to help them do that.
Okay, so that's the sweet spot, right? But what if you're not quite there yet? What are some of the pitfalls, if you lean too far in one direction or the other?
That's a great question.
What if you have the care, but you shy away from the challenge?
Yeah, that's a common trap.
Right.
Yeah, and the book calls that ruinous empathy.
Oh.
So you're being super nice, you're avoiding conflict, but in the long run, you're not actually helping that person grow.
Yeah, because you're not addressing the issues.
Exactly. And sometimes you might even be holding them back from reaching their full potential.
Right. It's almost like that, not telling someone they have spinach in their teeth.
Right, exactly.
Because you don't want to embarrass them, but then they go into a big meeting.
Yeah, and it's even worse then.
Exactly. Okay, so that's one pitfall.
Mm-hmm.
What about the flip side?
Yeah.
What if you're all about that direct challenge, but maybe you forget about the personal care part?
Right. So you're giving the feedback, you're being very clear, but it's coming across as, well, the book calls it obnoxiously aggressive.
Okay.
It's like you're just laying down the law without that foundation of care and empathy.
Yeah.
So it just ends up feeling brutal, demotivating. It can really damage relationships.
Right, because people might hear the message, but if they don't feel respected or valued, then it's not going to land well.
Exactly. It just creates defensiveness.
Okay, so we've talked about what radical candor is, what it isn't, why it's important. But let's get into the good stuff. Like, what are the tangible benefits?
Absolutely.
When you actually nail this radical candor approach, what good things can we expect to see?
Well, the book lays out some pretty compelling benefits.
Okay.
First and foremost, it builds trust. When people know that they can count on you to be honest with them, both the good and the bad, and that it all comes from a place of wanting what's best for them, that creates a really strong foundation of trust.
And I think trust is so fundamental.
It is, yeah.
Right. For any team to function well.
Absolutely, yeah.
You need that trust.
And it also makes people more receptive to feedback.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, when they trust you, they're more likely to see your feedback as helpful instead of feeling like it's a personal attack.
Right, because if you know that someone cares about you, you're more likely to listen to what they have to say.
Exactly. You're not automatically getting defensive. You're more open to hearing what they have to say.
Okay, so trust, more receptivity to feedback.
Yeah. What else?
What other good stuff happens?
Well, it also encourages this culture of reciprocal candor.
Okay, what does that mean?
So it means that when leaders model this open and honest communication, it becomes the norm for everyone. People feel more comfortable being candid with each other, both up and down the hierarchy.
Right, so it's not just like the boss giving feedback to the employee.
Right.
It's everyone feeling empowered to share their thoughts and perspectives.
Exactly, yeah, it's a two-way street.
Okay, I like that.
And when you have that kind of open communication, it also leads to less wasted effort.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because issues get addressed more quickly. People aren't afraid to speak up or point out problems. So you avoid all that, tiptoeing around sensitive issues.
Right, all that ambiguity and unspoken tension.
Exactly.
That can really bog things down.
Yeah, drains energy and productivity.
So you're saying with radical candor, things just move more efficiently?
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. And what's the ultimate impact on the team?
Well, ultimately it improves team cohesion.
Okay.
And keeps everyone focused on achieving shared goals. When you have that clear, honest, supportive communication, and everyone feels invested in each other's growth, the team just functions better.
Okay, so we know what radical candor is. We know why it's important.
Right.
But how do we actually do it?
Yeah, good question.
The book lays out a pretty specific series of steps for putting these principles into practice.
Right, Doug.
So let's walk through those.
Okay.
The first step is about sharing your own stories. So why start there?
Well, sharing personal stories is a great way to make this whole concept of radical candor feel real and relatable to your team.
Okay.
It's one thing to, give them a lecture about a management theory.
Right.
But it's way more powerful to illustrate it with your own experiences. Show them how it's played out for you, both the good and the bad.
Okay, so it's less about the theory, more about the practical application.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it also demonstrates vulnerability, which is really important for building trust.
Okay.
When you're open about your own struggles with giving and receiving feedback, the times you did it well, the times you maybe messed up, it makes you more human and approachable.
Right. And it probably makes people feel safer to be vulnerable themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you're not presenting yourself as this perfect leader who's got it all figured out.
Right.
And you're also showing them that this isn't just another management fad, right?
Right.
It's something that you genuinely believe in.
Yeah, you're walking the walk.
Exactly. Yeah. The book even says that your own stories will resonate more deeply.
Oh, definitely.
Because they carry your personal conviction.
For sure.
Which makes perfect sense.
It does, yeah.
Okay, step 2 is about soliciting feedback.
Okay.
But there's a twist here, right?
There is, yeah.
You're supposed to do this before you start giving feedback to your team.
Exactly. And that order is really important.
Okay, why?
Well, think about it. You're the boss, right? There's a power dynamic there.
Right.
People might be hesitant to critique you, even if they have valuable insights. So by asking for their feedback first, you're signaling that you're open to it. You value their perspectives. And that feedback is a two-way street.
Right. It shows that you're not above being on the receiving end.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it also gives you valuable information about your own blind spots.
Oh, that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not just going through the motions. You genuinely want to hear what they have to say and learn from it.
Okay, but how do you make sure that people are being honest with you?
Yeah, that's the key. Right.
Right.
The book talks about developing a BS meter.
Okay.
Because let's be real, sometimes people will just tell you what you want to hear.
Especially if you're the boss.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to discern that genuine feedback from just flattery. So what's the best way to solicit that honest feedback?
Well, the book suggests trying different approaches.
Okay.
Maybe start with one-on-ones or team discussions, maybe even anonymous surveys initially, and just be persistent. It's not a one-and-done thing.
Right. It's about creating that ongoing culture of feedback.
Exactly.
Okay, so step 3 is called growth management.
Okay.
And it involves having these career conversations with your team. So what's the goal of those conversations?
The main goal is to really understand what makes each team member tick.
Okay.
You want to know their motivations, their long-term career goals, and how their current role fits into all of that.
So it's about seeing their career as a journey.
Exactly.
Not just a job.
Not just a set of tasks, but a path they're on.
Right.
Yeah.
And the book talks about, breaking these conversations down into 3 stages.
It does, yeah.
The past, the future, and the present.
Right.
So what happens in each of those stages?
So in the past stage, you're really exploring their background,
Okay.
their key experiences, those pivotal moments in their career. What do they learn from those experiences? What are their values?
Okay.
What do they prioritize in a work environment?
So it's about understanding their why.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Then you move into the future stage.
Okay.
And this is where you explore their dreams, their long-term aspirations, even if they seem, ambitious or far off.
Okay, so even if their dream is to eventually leave the company.
Yeah, even then.
Right.
Yeah.
You still want to understand what they ultimately want to achieve.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because even if their ultimate goal is outside the company, you can still help them gain valuable experiences and develop skills that will serve them well in the future. And then finally, you move to the present stage.
Okay.
And this is where you get into action planning.
Okay, so this is where the rubber meets the road.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
You take what you've learned about their past, their future aspirations, and you work together to create a tangible plan.
Okay.
With specific steps they can take to move towards their goals.
Right.
And you set clear timelines, assign ownership, and make sure everyone's on the same page.
And this isn't a one-time thing, right?
Right. These conversations should be ongoing.
Okay.
Because people's interests and goals change over time.
Right, so you need to keep checking in, keep those lines of communication open.
Exactly, yeah.
The book also mentions this concept of rock stars versus superstars.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting framework.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that not everyone has the same level of ambition.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So walk us through that a little bit.
So rock stars are those people who are super reliable, highly skilled. They provide that stability and consistency to the team. And they might be perfectly content in their current role, focused on mastery.
Okay.
And then you have superstars. And these are the folks with, really high growth potential. They're always looking for new challenges and opportunities for advancement.
Okay, so it's not about one being better than the other?
No, not at all.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about understanding different types of ambition.
Exactly. And recognizing that you might need to manage those two types of people a bit differently.
Right, because what motivates a rock star might be very different from what motivates a superstar.
Precisely.
Okay, step 4 is about perfecting your 1.1 conversations.
Okay.
Which, I mean, we all have those meetings, right?
We do, yeah.
But how do we make them truly meaningful?
Yeah, good question.
In the context of radical candor.
Well, first and foremost, you have to actually have them.
Okay, right.
The book stresses the importance of prioritizing and consistently holding these 1.1s.
Right.
Because they could easily get bumped or just become, status updates.
Right. It's not just about checking the box. It's
Right.
about
Yeah.
making them focused and productive. So what makes a 1.1 conversation effective in this context?
Well, the book emphasizes that it's the employee's time.
Okay.
It's their opportunity to set the agenda, to talk about their priorities, their challenges, ask for your support.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about you dictating what needs to be discussed.
Right. It's about active listening.
It is, yeah.
And creating that space where they feel comfortable bringing up what's important to them.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. And any tips for making these conversations more engaging and productive?
Yeah, the book suggests experimenting with different formats.
Okay.
Maybe try a walking meeting,
Mm-hmm.
grab a coffee,
Mm-hmm.
just change up the scenery a bit.
Yeah.
Whatever helps create that more relaxed and open dialogue.
Right. So it feels less like a formal performance review,
Yeah.
more like an ongoing conversation.
Exactly.
Okay. Step 5 is where we get into the nitty-gritty of giving feedback effectively,
Right.
using what the book calls the CORE framework.
Mm-hmm.
So can you break down that framework for us?
Yeah, so CORE stands for context, observation, result, and next steps.
Okay.
And it's designed to make your feedback super clear and actionable.
Okay. So let's start with context.
Right, so context is all about setting the scene. You're referencing the specific situation or event where the behavior or performance you're giving feedback on occurred.
Okay.
Be precise about the when and the where.
Okay. Got it.
Then you have observation,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where you describe exactly what you saw or heard.
Okay.
Sticking to the facts.
Okay.
No interpretations or judgments yet.
So for example, instead of saying you were late,
Right.
you might say,
You arrived at 9.15 for the 9.0 meeting?
okay, so just stating the fact.
Exactly, yeah. What's next?
Then we have result.
Okay.
And this is where you explain the impact of the observed behavior.
Mm-hmm.
What was the consequence?
Okay.
How did it affect you, the team, the project, or the individual themselves?
Okay, so you're connecting the behavior to a tangible outcome.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the final piece.
The final piece is next steps.
Okay.
And this is where you lay out what you expect to happen next.
Yep.
What specific actions should the person take?
Mm-hmm.
What needs to change?
Or, if it's positive feedback, what should they continue doing?
Okay, so you're always ending with a clear call to action.
Exactly.
The book actually gives some examples of using this core framework.
It does, yeah.
Can you give us a quick example of how you might use it for constructive criticism?
Sure. Let's say someone on your team is constantly interrupting people in meetings.
Oh.
Using the core framework, you might say something like, during our team meeting this morning. That's your context.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that you interrupted Sarah and then David before they could finish their thoughts. That's your observation.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, some ideas weren't fully explored, and I noticed Sarah seemed a bit hesitant to speak up again later. That's your result.
Mm-hmm.
In future meetings, let's make a conscious effort to ensure everyone has a chance to finish their thoughts before others jump in. Those are your next steps.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
It's very specific. It's focused on the behavior and the impact,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives a clear path forward.
Right. It's not just you're interrupting too much.
Right.
It's explaining why that matters.
And, the book also emphasizes that both praise and criticism should have that balance of care and challenge.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's not just about pointing out flaws
Right.
or giving, empty compliments.
Yeah, it's about being thoughtful and intentional with your feedback.
So when you're giving praise, what are some things to keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, be specific.
Okay.
Don't just say, good job.
Mm-hmm.
Tell them exactly what they did well and why it was effective.
Mm-hmm.
And be sincere.
Mm-hmm.
Let them know that you genuinely appreciate their contribution.
Mm-hmm.
And even with praise, you can still include a bit of a challenge.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it maybe encourage them to take on more responsibility
Mm-hmm.
or share their expertise with others.
Okay, so even positive feedback can be a growth opportunity.
Exactly.
The book also mentions some specific principles for giving effective praise.
It does, yeah.
Do you remember what those are?
Let's see. Well, beyond being specific and sincere, you also want to make sure that your praise is building the relationship.
Okay.
It should make the person feel truly seen and valued.
Mm-hmm.
And as we mentioned, ideally it includes a little bit of a stretch or challenge to encourage their continued growth.
Okay.
And then the book also suggests praising in public when appropriate.
Okay.
Because it not only recognizes the individual's contribution, but it also sets a positive example for the rest of the team. But of course, you always want to be mindful of individual preferences.
Right, because some people might not be comfortable with public recognition.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about when you're giving criticism? What are some of the key principles for delivering that radically candid criticism?
Well, the book highlights several important attributes.
Okay.
First, it should be humble.
Okay, so what does that mean in this context?
It means approaching the conversation with a sense of, shared humanity, recognizing that you might not have all the answers and that everyone makes mistakes.
Okay, so it's not about being the all-knowing expert.
Right.
It's about approaching it as a learning opportunity for both of you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, what else?
It should be helpful.
Okay.
Meaning your primary goal is to help the person grow and improve. You're not just criticizing for the sake of criticizing.
Right. It's not about venting or getting something off your chest.
Right, exactly.
No way.
And then it should be immediate.
Okay.
So, give the feedback as soon as possible after the behavior occurred while the context is still fresh.
Okay, so don't wait for their performance review 6 months later.
Right. It's more effective to address it in the moment.
Okay.
And then whenever possible, you should deliver criticism in person and privately.
Okay, so that minimizes defensiveness.
Exactly. And finally, it should not be personalized.
Okay.
Focus on the behavior or the work, not on the individual's character.
Right. So instead of saying, you're lazy, you might say,
I noticed that this report was submitted past the deadline.
Okay, so you're focusing on the specific action.
Exactly, yeah.
And not attacking their personality. I think a really important point that the book makes is that radical candor isn't about your intent as the giver.
Right.
It's measured by how the feedback lands with the receiver.
That's so important.
Right.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter how well-intentioned you are. If the other person feels attacked or belittled, then it's not radical candor.
It's just criticism.
Right.
Yeah.
So that brings us to step 6, which is all about gauging feedback.
Okay.
Why is it so important to pay attention to the other person's reaction after you've given feedback?
Well, because you need to know if your message was actually received and understood the way you intended. So much of communication is nonverbal. You have to pay attention to their body language, their tone of voice, their immediate response.
Right. You have to read between the lines a little bit.
You do, yeah.
And the book even suggests explicitly asking how the feedback landed.
It does, yeah.
So you could say something like,
you could say, what are your thoughts on this? Or how does this resonate with you?
Yeah.
Just to open up the conversation.
And what if their reaction is negative? What if they seem upset or angry?
Yeah. That's your cue to really lean into the care personally part.
Okay.
Acknowledge their emotions without judgment.
Okay.
The book even provides some helpful phrases you can use.
Like what?
You could say something like, I'm noticing you seem a bit frustrated. What's coming up for you?
Okay.
Or...
Okay, so today we're going to dive into something that I think a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how to give feedback, how to receive feedback, and how to really create that culture of open communication in the workplace.
Yes.
And to do that, we are looking at this concept of radical candor, right? It's a book, it's a whole thing, and we've got some great material to unpack it.
Yeah, it's all about how to get that honest feedback flowing, but in a way that actually strengthens relationships and gets results.
Right, exactly. Because there is a balance.
Well, for sure.
Right, we're not just talking about being brutally honest.
No.
It's not about being mean.
Not at all.
So how would you describe that core balance, that tension that the book kind of gets at?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's a balancing act. It's how do you care personally at the same time that you're willing to challenge directly?
Okay, I like that. Care personally and challenge directly.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciate about the material we're looking at is that it's not just, feel-good vibes and general concepts.
Right.
There are very practical steps laid out.
Absolutely.
For how to actually put these principles into practice.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're going to really dig into care personally and challenge directly.
Okay.
What do those even